Marcus Wellington had money flowing through his veins like blood. The 45-year-old businessman from New York owned 3 luxury hotels, 2 private jets, and enough wealth to buy a small country. He believed money could solve any problem and open any door. This twisted thinking would soon crash into reality in the most spectacular way possible. London, summer heat made tourists cranky. But Marcus felt untouchable as he strutted through the crowded streets near Buckingham Palace. His $5,000 Italian suit sparkled under the afternoon sun, and his gold Rolex caught every ray of light. People stepped aside when they saw his confident stride, but Marcus mistook their politeness for fear of his obvious wealth. The royal guards stood like statues in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats. These weren't just costume performers for tourist photos. They were highly trained soldiers with years of military experience, protecting one of the world's most important royal families. Their job demanded absolute discipline, perfect posture, and unwavering focus regardless of weather, crowds, or distractions. Marcus had spent the morning throwing money around London like confetti. He bought expensive jewelry without looking at prices, tipped restaurant servers $100 bills just to see their shocked faces, and hired a private tour guide who followed him around like a loyal puppy. Every person he met treated him like royalty because of his spending power, feeding his already massive ego. The crowd around Buckingham Palace moved slowly, with hundreds of tourists taking photos and trying to get closer to the famous guards. Marcus pushed through families and elderly visitors without saying "excuse me." His expensive cologne mixed with the London air as he elbowed past a mother holding her young daughter's hand. Children pointed excitedly at the guards, while parents explained the importance of these silent protectors. Tour guides shared fascinating stories about royal traditions and the guards' incredible training. But Marcus heard none of this educational chatter. His mind was focused on one thing: proving that his money made him special enough to break any rule. The guard standing closest to the palace entrance was named James Morrison. He had served his country for 8 years, including 2 dangerous tours in Afghanistan where he learned to stay calm under life-threatening pressure. Standing guard at Buckingham Palace was an honor he had earned through dedication, bravery, and countless hours of training. His uniform represented centuries of British military tradition. James had dealt with difficult tourists before. Some tried to make the guards laugh. Others attempted to touch their uniforms or weapons, and a few even tried to bribe them for special photos. He had developed an iron will that allowed him to ignore every distraction, while remaining alert for real security threats. The afternoon sun beat down on James's heavy uniform, but he didn't move a muscle. Sweat rolled down his face under the thick black hat, yet his expression remained completely blank. His rifle stayed perfectly positioned, and his eyes stared straight ahead as if he were made of marble instead of flesh and blood. Marcus studied the guard like he was examining a piece of expensive art he might purchase. The businessman had heard stories about these guards never moving or reacting, no matter what tourists did to try getting their attention. He saw this as a personal challenge rather than respecting their professional duty. Other tourists maintained a respectful distance, understanding that these guards were working soldiers, not entertainment. Parents taught their children to admire the guards quietly and keep their voices down out of respect. Most visitors felt honored just to witness this important British tradition up close. But Marcus had different plans. He approached the guard with the swagger of someone who had never been told no. His leather shoes clicked against the pavement as he walked closer than the barriers allowed. Security cameras captured his every movement, and other tourists began to notice his inappropriate behavior. The businessman's face showed the kind of arrogance that comes from years of using money to avoid consequences. He had bribed his way out of speeding tickets, bought his way into exclusive clubs, and paid to make problems disappear. In his twisted mind, every person had a price, including this royal guard. James noticed the approaching tourist through his peripheral vision but maintained his disciplined stance. He had trained for situations exactly like this one. His military background taught him to assess threats while appearing completely unaware of his surroundings. Nothing in his posture revealed that he was fully aware of Marcus's inappropriate approach. The crowd began to sense something unusual was about to happen. Conversations grew quieter, as people turned their attention toward the wealthy American tourist who seemed determined to test the limits of royal protocol. Parents pulled their children closer, and other visitors started recording with their phones, sensing they might witness something extraordinary. Marcus stopped just inches from the guard's face, so close that James could smell the expensive cologne, mixed with the businessman's lunch. The tourist's eyes gleamed with the cruel excitement of someone about to prove his superiority over a person he viewed as nothing more than a costumed performer. The moment that would change both their lives forever was just seconds away. The spit hit James Morrison's left cheek with a wet slap that echoed through the suddenly silent courtyard. Marcus Wellington's saliva dripped slowly down the guard's face, but James didn't flinch, blink, or even breathe differently. His training had prepared him for insults, but this level of disrespect crossed every line of human decency. Marcus stepped back with a satisfied smirk, expecting to see anger, embarrassment, or some reaction from the guard. Instead, he found himself staring into the same blank expression that had been there moments before. The complete lack of response frustrated him more than any angry outburst would have done. The crowd gasped in collective horror. Parents covered their children's eyes while other tourists frantically whispered in different languages, all expressing the same shock at what they had just witnessed. Several people immediately began recording with their phones, knowing they were documenting something that would soon become international news. An elderly British gentleman in the crowd shook his head in disgust and muttered loud enough for others to hear, "Absolutely shameful behavior. That guard deserves our respect, not this treatment." His wife nodded in agreement while glaring at Marcus with the kind of disapproval that only proper British citizens can deliver. Marcus felt the crowd's hostile energy, but interpreted it as jealousy rather than righteous anger. He believed they were upset because he had the courage to do something they wouldn't dare attempt. His wealth had isolated him from normal human emotions for so long that he couldn't recognize genuine moral outrage when it surrounded him. Security cameras captured every angle of the incident from multiple positions around the palace grounds. Within minutes, the footage was being reviewed by security officials who couldn't believe what they were seeing. One officer rewound the video 3 times, hoping he had misunderstood what happened. James felt the saliva sliding down his cheek like a cold reminder of human cruelty, but his military discipline held firm. He had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan without breaking his composure, and he wouldn't let a spoiled tourist accomplish what trained killers couldn't. His breathing remained steady, his posture perfect, and his eyes continued staring straight ahead. The businessman reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick roll of $100 bills held together with a gold money clip. He waved the cash in front of James's face like he was tempting a hungry animal with food. The money represented more than most people earned in several months, but to Marcus, it was just another tool for controlling people. "Come on, soldier boy," Marcus said loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "I know you want this money, just give me a little smile for my camera, and all these bills are yours. Nobody has to know you broke your little rules." The tourists watched in fascination as this real-life drama unfolded before their eyes. Some felt embarrassed to be witnessing such inappropriate behavior, while others couldn't look away from the train wreck of human decency happening in front of them. James could smell the money's distinctive scent mixed with Marcus's cologne, but neither the cash nor the attempted bribery affected his resolve. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family and uphold British military tradition. No amount of money could purchase his honor or compromise his duty. A young girl in the crowd tugged on her father's shirt and asked in a voice loud enough for Marcus to hear, "Daddy, why is that mean man being so rude to the nice soldier?" Her innocent question cut through the tension like a knife, highlighting the moral clarity that children often possess but adults sometimes lose. Marcus heard the child's question but felt no shame or self-reflection. Instead, he became more determined to prove his point about money's power over principles. He had spent his entire adult life believing that every person could be bought if the price was high enough, and this guard would not be the exception. That proved him wrong. The businessman began counting the bills slowly in front of James's face, making sure each $100 note was visible to both the guard and the watching crowd. His fingers moved deliberately as he displayed what he considered an irresistible offer that would finally break the soldier's discipline. 100, 200, 300, Marcus counted aloud, his voice growing more confident with each bill. "That's more money than you make in a week, probably a month. All you have to do is acknowledge that I exist, and it's yours." James's military training included extensive preparation for psychological warfare and interrogation resistance. He had learned to separate his mind from physical discomfort and emotional manipulation. This wealthy tourist's amateur attempts at bribery were nothing compared to what he had endured during his specialized training. The crowd's mood shifted from shock to anger as Marcus continued his offensive display. Several British tourists began muttering complaints about ugly Americans and their complete lack of respect for British traditions. Even visitors from other countries felt embarrassed by Marcus's behavior. A security officer finally began walking toward the scene, but protocol required him to move slowly and avoid creating additional disruption. Royal Guards were trained to handle difficult situations independently, and premature intervention could undermine their authority and training. Marcus noticed the approaching security officer, but felt no concern about potential consequences. His lawyers had gotten him out of trouble in 12 different countries, and he assumed this situation would be no different. Money had always been his solution to every problem, and he saw no reason why that should change now. The businessman's confidence reached dangerous levels as he prepared to escalate his assault on the guard's dignity. He had no idea that his actions were about to trigger a response that would haunt him for the rest of his privileged life. The explosion of movement was so sudden and precise that most witnesses missed the actual moment it happened. James Morrison's transformation from statue to soldier occurred in less than 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds contained enough disciplined fury to stop Marcus Wellington's heart mid-beat. James stepped forward with military precision, his boots clicking against the pavement like thunder in the stunned silence. His rifle remained perfectly positioned, but his entire presence had shifted from passive guardian to active protector. The change was so dramatic that several tourists instinctively stepped backward, suddenly remembering they were watching a real soldier, not a tourist attraction. "Step back." James's voice erupted from his chest with the power of 8 years military training and countless hours of parade ground drilling. The command echoed off the palace walls and seemed to shake the very air around them. Birds flew from nearby trees, and car alarms in the distance seemed to respond to the sheer force of his voice. Marcus stumbled backward so quickly that he nearly fell over his own expensive shoes. The money in his hands scattered across the pavement like green confetti, as his confident smirk melted into pure terror. For the first time in decades, his wealth offered no protection from the consequences of his actions. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause and cheers. Tourists who had been filming the incident now captured Marcus's humiliation as he scrambled to collect his scattered bills from the dirty pavement. The tables had turned completely, and the man who thought money made him untouchable was now crawling on his hands and knees in front of hundreds of witnesses. James returned to his original position with the same mechanical precision, his face resuming its blank expression as if nothing had happened. But everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. The guard had demonstrated perfect control by using exactly the amount of force necessary to handle the situation without exceeding his authority. A British woman in the crowd started clapping slowly, and soon dozens of other tourists joined in, showing their appreciation for the guard's professionalism and restraint. Children who had been scared by Marcus's behavior now smiled and waved at James, understanding that he was one of the good guys protecting important people. Marcus' hands shook as he gathered his money from the ground, his expensive suit now wrinkled and stained from kneeling on the pavement. Other tourists stepped around him without offering help, their expressions showing the same disgust they might reserve for someone who had kicked a puppy or stolen from charity. The security officer who had been approaching the scene slowed his pace, recognizing that the guard had handled the situation perfectly according to protocol. There was no need for additional intervention since Marcus was clearly backing away, and the immediate threat had been neutralized through proper channels. Teenage girl in the crowd pulled out her phone and began live streaming to her social media followers. "Oh my God, you guys, this rich jerk just got completely destroyed by a royal guard," she whispered excitedly into her camera. "This is going to go viral so fast." Marcus finally stood up with his crumpled money, his face red with embarrassment and fury. He had expected to humiliate the guard, but instead found himself publicly shamed in front of hundreds of witnesses. The businessman's ego couldn't accept that his wealth had failed him so completely. "This isn't over," Marcus muttered under his breath, but loud enough for nearby tourists to hear. His threat sounded pathetic coming from someone who had just been reduced to crawling on the ground for scattered money. Several people in the crowd laughed at his empty words. James heard the threat, but showed no reaction, maintaining his professional composure while staying alert for any additional aggressive behavior. His training had taught him that defeated bullies often became more dangerous when their pride was wounded, so he remained ready to respond if necessary. The businessman straightened his tie and tried to recover some dignity, but his expensive clothes couldn't hide the fact that he had been completely outmatched by someone he had underestimated. The stains on his knees and the dirt under his fingernails told the real story of what had just happened. Marcus began walking away from the palace, pushing through the crowd with less confidence than when he had arrived. Tourist after tourist stepped aside not out of respect for his wealth, but out of disgust for his behavior. The money that usually commanded attention now seemed worthless in the face of universal disapproval. A small boy in the crowd pointed at the retreating figure and asked his mother, "Why was that man so mean to the soldier?" His mother replied loudly enough for Marcus to hear, "Some people think money makes them better than others, but they're wrong. Kindness and respect are worth more than all the money in the world." The businessman's jaw clenched as he heard the mother's words, but he couldn't argue with her logic without proving her point. His behavior had demonstrated exactly the kind of entitled arrogance that money sometimes creates in people who forget their basic humanity. James remained at his post as the crowd gradually dispersed, but many tourists lingered to take respectful photos and express their admiration for his professionalism. Parents used the incident as a teaching moment, explaining to their children about respect, dignity, and standing up to bullies. The guard's supervisor, who had been monitoring the situation from a nearby position, gave James an almost imperceptible nod of approval. The young soldier had handled a difficult situation with perfect judgment, using minimal force to achieve maximum results, while maintaining the dignity of his position and uniform. Marcus reached the edge of the palace grounds and turned back for one final look at the guard who had humbled him so completely. James stood like a statue once again, but Marcus now knew the incredible strength and discipline hidden beneath that motionless exterior. The businessman had learned a lesson he would never forget, though he didn't yet realize how much deeper the consequences would go. The video exploded across the internet faster than wildfire in dry grass. Within 6 hours of the incident, wealthy tourist humiliated by royal guard had been viewed over 2 million times across multiple social media platforms. The teenage girl's live stream had captured everything in perfect detail, and her followers shared it with the enthusiasm of people witnessing justice served cold. Marcus Wellington sat in his 5-star hotel suite, watching his public humiliation play on repeat across every major news network. CNN, BBC, Fox News, and dozens of international channels had picked up the story, with commentators analyzing every aspect of his behavior and the guard's perfect response. The businessman's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, but he had stopped answering after the 15th interview request. His lawyers were working overtime trying to control the damage, but they couldn't fight the court of public opinion where he had already been tried, convicted, and sentenced to social exile. Social media users had turned Marcus into a living meme. His shocked expression when the guard shouted at him became the perfect reaction image for posts about entitled people getting their comeuppance. Memes comparing him to various spoiled children flooded Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok with brutal efficiency. The hotel staff began treating Marcus differently after recognizing him from the viral videos. Room service arrived late, if at all. The concierge suddenly couldn't secure reservations at exclusive restaurants that had welcomed his money just days before. Even the cleaning staff whispered and pointed when they thought he wasn't looking. Back in New York, Marcus's business associates watched the videos with growing concern about their association with him. 3 major clients canceled upcoming deals within 24 hours, citing image concerns and brand alignment issues. His company's stock price began a steady decline as investors worried about the negative publicity. James Morrison, meanwhile, became an overnight hero. The Royal Guard's social media accounts, which he rarely used, gained hundreds of thousands of followers praising his professionalism and restraint. Messages of support poured in from military veterans, law enforcement officers, and ordinary citizens who appreciated his dignified response to such disrespectful treatment. A British military support charity created a fundraising campaign in James's honor, raising money for veterans' mental health services. The campaign description read, "In honor of Guard Morrison's exemplary service and professionalism in the face of disgraceful behavior, we're raising funds to support our heroes, who defend our values with such dignity." Marcus's own employees began questioning their loyalty to a boss whose behavior had embarrassed them on the world stage. His personal assistant submitted her resignation via email, writing, "I cannot in good conscience continue working for someone whose actions reflect so poorly on basic human decency." The businessman's wife called from their Manhattan penthouse, her voice cold with fury. "Marcus, I'm getting calls from everyone we know. Our children are being asked about this at school. You've humiliated our entire family with your childish behavior." The conversation ended with her hanging up when he tried to justify his actions. International news programs began using the incident as a case study in entitled Behavior and Cultural Disrespect. A psychology professor on BBC explained to millions of viewers how extreme wealth sometimes creates a disconnection from normal social consequences. Using Marcus as a perfect example of this phenomenon, the palace released an official statement, praising Guard Morrison's exemplary professionalism and restraint in handling a difficult situation. The brief statement carried enormous weight, essentially giving royal approval to the Guard's actions while subtly condemning Marcus's behavior without mentioning him by name. Marcus tried to salvage his reputation by offering a half-hearted apology through his public relations team, but the statement only made things worse. "Mr. Wellington regrets any misunderstanding during his visit to London" sounded more like an excuse than genuine remorse, and social media users tore it apart within hours. Late-night talk show hosts made Marcus a regular part of their monologues, with comedians creating elaborate sketches about entitled tourists trying to bribe various workers around the world. His name became synonymous with ugly American behavior, a reputation that would follow him for years. The businessman's attempts to return to his normal routine failed completely. Restaurants that once competed for his business now found reasons to be fully booked when he called. Private clubs where he held memberships began reviewing their policies regarding member conduct, which everyone understood was code for preparing to remove him. James continued his duties with the same dedication as always, but now carried the additional burden of being a public figure. Tourists specifically requested photos with him, though he maintained his professional distance. Fellow guards treated him with even more respect, proud to serve alongside someone who had represented their unit so honorably. The incident's aftermath revealed something Marcus had never experienced before: the limits of money's power. For the first time in his adult life, he faced consequences that couldn't be bought off, lawyers couldn't argue away, and public relations firms couldn't spin into positive coverage. British tabloids ran daily stories about the spitting American, tracking his movements around London and documenting every restaurant that refused him service, every hotel that suddenly had no available rooms, and every exclusive event that rescinded his invitations. Marcus realized he had become prisoner in his own expensive hotel suite, afraid to venture out where tourists might recognize him and capture more embarrassing footage. The man who had once commanded respect through wealth now cowered behind heavy curtains, watching his reputation crumble in real time across every screen in the world. The viral video had created a permanent record of his worst moment, one that would follow him forever in the digital age. Every future business partner, potential friend, or romantic interest would eventually discover the footage that revealed his true character when he thought no one important was watching. The knock on Marcus's hotel room door came at exactly 8:47 a.m., 3 days after the incident that had ruined his life. Two serious-looking men in dark suits stood in the hallway, their credentials identifying them as officers from the Metropolitan Police's Royal Protection Unit. Their presence meant that Marcus's situation had escalated far beyond public embarrassment. "Mr. Wellington," the older officer said in a crisp British accent, "we need to discuss your conduct at Buckingham Palace. You're not under arrest, but we strongly advise you to cooperate with our investigation." His tone suggested this wasn't really a request despite the polite wording. Marcus quote, "As expensive lawyers had warned him this might happen, but he had dismissed their concerns as typical attorney paranoia. Now facing real law enforcement officers trained to protect the royal family, he realized his actions had crossed lines he hadn't even known existed. The officers explained that spitting on a royal guard constituted assault under British law, regardless of the victim's response or lack thereof. Additionally, his attempts to bribe a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces violated several statutes related to corruption and interference with military personnel performing their duties. "We have multiple video recordings from different angles," the younger officer added, consulting his notepad. 17 separate witnesses have provided statements, and the security footage clearly shows your actions. The evidence is, shall we say, quite comprehensive." Marcus tried to explain that he had meant no real harm, that it was just a stupid tourist mistake. But the officer's expressions remained professionally neutral. They had dealt with enough criminals to recognize hollow excuses when they heard them, and Marcus's words carried no weight against the mountain of evidence. The businessman's heart sank when the officers informed him that James Morrison had filed a formal complaint. The guard who had shown such restraint during the incident had decided that letting the matter slide would send the wrong message to other potential troublemakers who might target royal personnel. Guard Morrison initially preferred to handle this through military channels, the older officer explained, but his superiors insisted on civilian prosecution to demonstrate that attacks on royal protection personnel will not be tolerated, regardless of the perpetrator's financial status or nationality. Marcus's mind raced through his options, but for once in his life, money couldn't provide an easy escape. British law didn't recognize American wealth as a valid defense against criminal charges, and his team of expensive attorneys had no jurisdiction in a foreign court system that took attacks on royal guards very seriously. The officers presented Marcus with a formal summons to appear in Westminster Magistrates' Court the following week. The charges included common assault, attempted bribery of a military officer, and disturbing the peace. Each charge carried potential fines, and the assault conviction could result in a criminal record that would affect his ability to travel internationally. "I should mention," the younger officer added almost casually, "that the Crown Prosecution Service is taking particular interest in this case. They view it as an opportunity to demonstrate that no one is above the law when it comes to respecting British institutions and personnel." Marcus's face went pale as he realized the full implications. This wasn't just a local incident that would blow over in a few weeks. The British government was preparing to make an example of him, using his case to send a clear message about the consequences of disrespecting royal guards. The businessman's expensive legal team had already warned him that fighting the charges could backfire spectacularly. A trial would generate even more negative publicity, and British juries were notoriously unsympathetic toward wealthy foreigners who showed disrespect for national institutions and traditions. His lawyers advised accepting a plea agreement that would include substantial fines, community service, and a formal apology to Guard Morrison. The alternative was risking a trial where the viral video would be played repeatedly in open court, generating fresh waves of international humiliation. Meanwhile, James Morrison was experiencing his own challenges with sudden fame. The palace had assigned him a media liaison officer to help manage the constant interview requests and public appearances. Military officials were carefully balancing their desire to support James with their need to maintain the guard's traditional mystique and professional distance. The guard's family had been thrust into the spotlight as well, with reporters tracking down his parents, siblings, and childhood friends for comments about his character and background. His mother proudly told journalists that James had always stood up to bullies, even as a child, but she worried about the pressure her son was facing. James received thousands of letters from supporters around the world, including many from military personnel who appreciated his professionalism and restraint. A group of American veterans started a petition requesting that James be given special recognition for representing military values so admirably under difficult circumstances. The incident had created an unexpected diplomatic dimension as well. The American embassy issued a statement distancing the United States government from Marcus's behavior, emphasizing that his actions didn't represent American values or the millions of respectful American tourists who visited Britain each year. British-American relations, while not seriously damaged by one tourist's bad behavior, required some careful management. High-ranking officials on both sides used the incident as an opportunity to reaffirm their nation's shared commitment to mutual respect and proper conduct. Marcus spent sleepless nights in his hotel room, watching his business empire crumble through news reports and stock market updates. 3 more major clients had terminated their contracts, and several business partners were exploring legal options to distance themselves from his companies entirely. The businessman's wife had moved out of their Manhattan penthouse, taking their children to stay with her parents while she considered divorce proceedings. His behavior had not only destroyed his reputation, but was tearing apart the family he had worked decades to provide for through his ruthless business practices. As the court date approached, Marcus finally began to understand that his wealth, which had always been his solution to every problem, had become irrelevant in the face of consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. The royal guard he had tried to humiliate had inadvertently taught him the most expensive lesson of his privileged life. Westminster Magistrates Court buzzed with unusual energy on the morning of Marcus Wellington's hearing. International media representatives filled the public gallery, while sketch artists prepared to capture every moment of what had become Britain's most watched court case of the year. The businessman who had once commanded boardrooms now sat nervously at the defendant's table, his expensive suit unable to hide his diminished confidence. Judge Margaret Thornberry entered the courtroom with the stern dignity that had made her one of Britain's most respected magistrates. Her reputation for fairness was matched only by her intolerance for entitled behavior, making her the perfect judge to handle a case involving wealth, privilege, and disrespect for British institutions. Marcus' legal team had negotiated a plea agreement, but Judge Thornberry wanted to ensure the defendant understood the full weight of his actions before accepting it. "Mr. Wellington," she said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "do you understand that your behavior was not merely rude or inappropriate, but constituted a criminal assault on a serving member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces?" The businessman's voice cracked slightly as he answered, "Yes, Your Honor. I understand completely, and I deeply regret my actions." His lawyers had coached him extensively on showing proper remorse, but the words still felt foreign coming from someone who had spent decades believing his wealth placed him above ordinary social rules. Guard Morrison sat in the front row of the public gallery, wearing his dress uniform and maintaining the same dignified posture that had made him famous worldwide. His presence served as a powerful reminder of the professionalism and restraint he had shown during Marcus's attack, contrasting sharply with the defendant's childish behavior. Judge Thornberry reviewed the case details aloud, ensuring that everyone present understood the full scope of Marcus's misconduct. The defendant approached a royal guard performing his lawful duties, spat in his face without provocation, then attempted to bribe him with a substantial sum of money. This behavior shows a profound disrespect for British law, military service, and basic human dignity. The judge's words were broadcast live across Britain and streamed internationally, reaching millions of viewers who had followed the story since the original incident. Social media exploded with real-time reactions as people watched justice being served to someone who had believed himself untouchable. Marcus accepted responsibility for all charges as part of his plea agreement, admitting guilt for assault, attempted bribery, and disturbing the peace. His admission was met with satisfied murmurs from the packed gallery, where British citizens who had been outraged by his behavior finally saw him held accountable. The sentence reflected both the seriousness of the offense and the need for deterrent effect. Marcus was ordered to pay £50,000 in fines, perform 200 hours of community service with British military charities, attend anger management counseling, and write a formal letter of apology to Guard Morrison to be read publicly in court. "Mr. Wellington," Judge Thornberry continued, Your wealth cannot purchase exemption from the consequences of criminal behavior. This court hopes your experience serves as a reminder that respect for others is not optional, regardless of one's financial circumstances. The most humiliating part came when Marcus was required to read his apology letter aloud in the packed courtroom. His voice shook as he expressed remorse for his inexcusable behavior and praised Guard Morrison's exemplary professionalism and restraint in the face of my shameful conduct. James Morrison accepted the apology with a simple nod, demonstrating the same dignity that had made him a hero to millions. His response showed that while he bore no personal grudge against Marcus, he understood the importance of the court proceedings for deterring future incidents. The judge imposed additional conditions that would follow Marcus for years. He was banned from visiting any royal property for 5 years, required to complete a cultural sensitivity course before traveling internationally, and placed on a list that would flag him for additional scrutiny at British borders. Outside the courthouse, Marcus faced a forest of cameras and microphones as reporters shouted questions about his experience and future plans. His prepared statement was brief and carefully worded. I have learned that respect cannot be purchased, and I hope my experience serves as a lesson to others about the importance of treating all people with dignity. The businessman's humiliation was complete, but the consequences extended far beyond the courtroom. His business empire continued crumbling as news of his convictions spread globally. Companies that had once courted his investment now treated his name as toxic to their brands and reputations. James Morrison returned to his duties at Buckingham Palace, where tourists now treated the guards with even greater respect after witnessing the consequences Marcus had faced for his disrespectful behavior. The guards' conduct during the entire ordeal had elevated not just his own reputation, but the standing of all royal protection personnel. The incident became a permanent part of training programs for diplomatic personnel, business travelers, and tourists visiting Britain. Marcus's behavior served as the perfect example of how cultural insensitivity and entitled attitudes could destroy careers, reputations, and relationships in the modern interconnected world. Marcus returned to New York a changed man, though whether that change would prove lasting remained to be seen. His wife had filed for divorce, his children barely spoke to him, and his business empire lay in ruins. The man who had once believed money could solve any problem now faced years of rebuilding not just his fortune, but his character. Guard Morrison received a commendation from his commanding officer and continued serving with the same dedication that had made him famous. His story became an inspiration to military personnel worldwide, proving that dignity and professionalism could triumph over arrogance and entitlement. The viral video that had started everything continued circulating years later, serving as a permanent reminder that in the age of social media, a single moment of poor judgment could have consequences lasting far longer than anyone might imagine. Marcus Wellington had learned this lesson in the most expensive and humiliating way possible, but perhaps that was exactly what justice required.